It begins with a line cut into darkness, a scalpel of motion that gathers the solar wind like gauze as it slides, an interstellar traveler carrying the hush of 1,000 nights and the arithmetic of other suns. We were not first, and we may not be last, but in this moment we are the witnesses who happen to be facing the right way, eyes salted with photons and instruments listening for the story written in velocity. The first data point is a needle, position, then a second, then timing between the two, and suddenly a trajectory blooms out of the noise, a hyperbolic announcement that this visitor is not bound to our gravity's patient sermons. It will not linger like comets raised in our cold nursery, nor will it swing back to wave again. It cuts across the heliosphere as if obeying a map we can almost read. Almost. And yet to describe it is to betray how it made us feel. The way it carried silence with intention, the way its path felt like punctuation in a sentence we thought we had finished, the way it suggested that space is not a blank, but a library with shelves we have not climbed. We call it 3-Eye Atlas because we have to call it something, because naming is how humans hold things long enough to study them. The eye confers interstellar, our bureaucratic wreath for travelers born under other stars, and the survey that flagged it earns the rest. Numbers and letters behave like scaffolding until the building is strong enough to stand alone, and then the scaffolding disappears in the mind, leaving only the shape of the thing. That shape is a glint barely brighter than the sky around it, zeros and small decimals whispering through antennae, a smear of light on CCDs that must be pulled like thread and woven into certainty. The certainty arrives in the language of orbital elements, eccentricity greater than 1, asymptotic speed at infinity, inclination that refuses our famille seul, I-plane. These are not opinions, they are the stamps on an interstellar passport, inked by gravity and read by spectrometers that try to smell the far away just from how the sunlight bounces back. Somewhere a graduate student gasped first, somewhere else a radio clock ticked across a timing server, and a dozen observatories pointed at once, as if the sky had suddenly said, "Look here," in a voice we all heard beneath consciousness. What we gleaned in those early hours and days has the feel of breath on cold glass, fleeting but revealing shapes if you lean close. The spectrum hinted at familiar chemistry, the aching broadness of water ice, the struck matches of carbon chains, the cautious glow of cyanide-bearing fragments that comets sometimes exhale when the sun begins to warm their surfaces. But beneath these familiar lines lived a tempered thermal curve, like a wick that should have flared brighter but did not, as if the object were resisting the sun's persuasion. Thermal inertia, yes, we know that song, porous regolith, roughness, rotation that lifts shadows over craters before frost commits to vapor. And yet the numbers came back like a politely closed door. Warmer than expected at noon, cooler than expected at dusk, less spiky, more disciplined. Photometry stitched into a light curve suggested a rotation whose period drummed steadily, then, only then, showed a faint modulation riding on top, a tremor too repeatable to dismiss as instrumental gossip. In models, we pushed sunlight in, watched heat leak out, listened for a match. The match sat close but not perfect, as if something inside the body were agreeing with physics but also negotiating for a little privacy. An object can be honest in its gravity and still carry mysteries in its posture. When we chased non-gravitational acceleration, the tiny extras beyond the clean pull of the sun and the giant notes of Jupiter's deep chord, we found a nudge that was not reckless like vapor jets firing at noon, nor fickle like dust lifting as mountains turn their faces to dawn. The nudge was phase-locked to rotation, disciplined, as though the body pushed back in rhythm with its own turning, tiny breaths aligned with a metronome no comet usually keeps. In the literature, we are careful. Outgassing is a many-headed thing. Microjets can hide under coarser noise. Shape matters. Tumbling complicates shamefully. But if you plot residuals and stare, you feel it, a neatness, a refusal to wander. The brightness modulation that rode the rotation was equally shy but consistent, whispering geometry through variations in area and albedo. There are natural ways to craft such signatures, slabs and shadows, fractures that open and close, a crust stitched by sublimation. There are also ways that are less natural, that imply purpose. The only honest response is to carry both in both hands and keep walking. Between our certainty and our daring, a question laid down roots. What if inside this traveler, heat was not merely resisted, but managed? Cryogenics is a human word for a cosmic habit. The universe stores things cold. A cometary body can be a vault without keys because physical law does the guarding. But there is a different kind of vaulting, the sort that requires deliberate arrangements of material and geometry, layered shells that scatter heat back into space, high emissivity skins that bleed warmth on command, optical baffles that keep stray photons from wandering inward, and rotational attitudes that turn hotspots to night before they deepen. We know these tricks because we practice them. Infrared telescopes that stare at their own sunshades, radiators that glow faintly in vacuum, tanks that keep hydrogen quiet at temperatures where quantum shivers matter. If you embedded such principles into a natural body, if frost were folded like insulation, if pores and pebbles conspired to redirect conduction, if voids were placed where heat would otherwise collect, you might find a thermal signature like the one our instruments murmured about. Disciplined, phase-aware, cautious to a fault. The phrase cryogenic vaults gallops too quickly for the literature, but in the poetry of speculation, it at least circles the corral, cavities that keep something fragile asleep while crossing the radiance between stars. Coincidence, the old skeptic says, is just the universe refusing our taste for patterns. Yet timing can bend skepticism until it creaks. When 3I Atlas slid into our attention, a debonair set of long-period comets were arranging their perihelia like guests arriving within minutes of one another at a party nobody remembered arranging. Their orbits were not siblings, not clones, not marching in step, just enough clustering to send graduate students to whiteboards and dynamicalists to their integrators. Add to that a solar wind hiccup that briefly altered the radio transparency of a patch of ionosphere beloved by a handful of ground arrays. Add to it a calibration glitch on a heliophysics relay that decided with exquisite irony to slip into safe mode during a window when the interstellar object would have crossed a beam. Each event is explainable, each is forgivable, none requires conspiracy. But string them and you get a melody of improbabilities that hums on the tongue. The mind, built to notice lion shapes in grass, turns. We returned to the data and canceled our poetry because that is how one behaves in the presence of numbers. The melody persists anyway, not as proof, but as atmosphere, a feeling that the cosmos had coordinated not for us, but for itself, and we were simply standing where the lines intersected. The story of any passerby from beyond our comet cloud is pinned to gravity's loom. Hyperbolic orbits are less orbits than insults hurled at the sun. They pass, they nod, they leave. Yet the way 3I Atlas grazed the solar system's heavyweights carried nuance. Jupiter's deep well, always the maestro of rearrangements, offered a low bow at a distance, its perturbation small but noticeable, like a stagehand moving scenery rather than a lead changing the script. The object's path threaded nodal crossings with a luck that felt like practice. Tiny torques accumulated exactly where the gradients were steep, as though the traveler knew where momentum could be taken with minimal fuss. Of course, one can see. Emulate 1,000,000 random orientations and find a few that behave as if they are finessing a slingshot without effort. That is statistics performing its quiet duty. Still, when you plot the osculating elements through time and watch the perihelion precess and the inclination breathe, you sense a kind of elegance. Natural elegance is common in mechanics. Geodesics are beautiful because physics is. But more than once, our numerical models had to confess to a whisper of non-gravitational persuasion tucked at the right phases, as if the traveler were leaning slightly into its curve to keep the line clean. correcting just enough to erase a flourish. Then came the seam. It is a truth of observational astronomy that the world conspires to blink when you beg it not to. Weather takes an array's teeth. Maintenance insists on timetables that can't know what the sky will do. Instruments throw tantrums in code that was tested too many times to be distrusted until the one time when distrust would have saved a screaming. For 31 hours, that will live a long time in the footnotes. Multiple assets slipped from full attention. A storm belt dragged wet eyes across a hemisphere. A relay paused to keep itself safe from a warning later diagnosed as harmless, and a window of geometry swung the object through angles that made ground and space both poor lovers. We missed the loudest part of a whisper we were already straining to hear. If the traveler altered itself then, it did so in privacy. When the sky reopened and the clocks returned to their habits, 3i Atlas was still there, smiling shyly in the numbers, trajectory nominal within uncertainties, residuals that could be massaged back into peace if your priors preferred quiet. But some of us heard the dark room speaking in its silence, and the suspicion it planted was not paranoia so much as an itch to build better vigilance. What might it carry if vaulting is more than metaphor? The bold will say life and have the grace to mean not people or even complexity, but information condensed into chemistry, a frozen curriculum for cells to study when they wake, a folded alphabet of proteins that memorize climates long gone, a library of sugars that teach membranes to be brave in solvents we have not tasted. The cautious will say isotopes and structures, the arrangement of silicates that record their annealing history, the ratios that gossip about the nursery star's breath, the noble gases that remember pressures we can only model. Between the bold and the cautious stands engineering, which is simply persistence refined into method. If anyone, anywhere, anywhen wished to send anything fragile across the long brightness between systems, they would kneel before cold as a craftsman kneels before a tool. They would build cavities where convection cannot argue, thermally isolate with foams that are rock by any other name, shadow by design, and spin to tuck warmth into a moving average too smooth to sting. They would pick their perihelion not for drama, but for safety, bending just enough to harvest a little speed without melting their cargo's patience. They would, in short, hide inside something we would recognize as a comet, because comets are what the universe recognizes as sensible for that purpose. We did not catch a signal, and that is an important thing to say out loud. No beacon sang, no narrowband thread laced our receivers with pride, no code proclaimed itself in primes. The silence is not proof of emptiness any more than a closed book is proof of unwritten pages. Radio is a blinkered sense that favors the loud and the cooperative. Thermals and dynamics are more stubborn, more honest, prone to whispering their truths even to eavesdroppers. If the object chose to be obvious, it was not in a language we teach our machines to expect. The consensus, conservative and correct, is that 3i Atlas is a natural body whose personality is expressed in ratios and rotation, not in motives. The fringe, imaginative and sometimes correct, argues for intention hiding in naturalness, like a poet hiding in conversation. You can live in the bridge between those shores without falling. That bridge is simply the scientific method, set to music, measure, model, doubt, repeat, and hold open the door to possibilities without inviting superstition to sit down and eat your patience. Where does this leave us? It leaves us with better questions and a clearer hunger. We will not be content to meet the next interstellar wanderer only with telescopes that blink and computers that fit curves until the story agrees to be written. We will arm ourselves with interceptors, sleek, hibernating machines launched long before the guest is announced, that can wake, turn, and sprint, guided by gravitational choreography and small, efficient engines that drink the vacuum like wine. Sunshades and radiators will be their cloaks. Cryocoolers will be their flutes. They will sidle up to the traveler and taste its heat directly, map its breath molecule by molecule, listen for the humor of rotation humming through its mass. Perhaps we will ask permission and be refused. Perhaps the only answer it will give is the cold. That too is an answer. We will also learn to build the reverse, messengers that we fling outward, icy couriers that know how to survive the winter between suns with cargoes we believe worth the waiting. If we decide that biology's alphabet should ride in such couriers, seeds, recipes, parables of chemistry, we will become the kind of civilization that trusts long bets. The gravitational classroom that shaped 3I Atlas is the same one that taught us calculus, and we forget at our peril that its strictness is also generosity. The sun offers energy and hazard in the same hand. Jupiter offers protection and disruption in the same glance. The heliosphere hums a melody of particles that can smooth or sandblast. To read such a classroom well is to locate the sweet spots where a path becomes gentle. Lagrange points that behave like shelves in the wind, resonance lanes where pushes cancel, shadowed corridors behind glare. Early mission designs for interceptors draw braids through these structures like calligraphy, curling trajectories into tight little blossoms near Earth before flinging them outward in thin, precise strokes, a generation raised on Kutufos. Trips to the moon will have to relearn patience. Rendezvous at interstellar speeds is not a thing you bluster into. You arrive quietly, the way surgeons arrive at arteries, instruments warmed only enough to work, sensors tuned to hear heat the way ears hear breath in the dark. There is poetry in such arrivals, and more than poetry. There is prudence, because a vault that is indeed keeping something safe does not appreciate rough hands. Not every chapter in this story is written in the skies. Some of it is written in the rooms where we argue about budgets and ethics. If the universe is sending us cold couriers, we must decide whether to open them. If we are tempted to design our own, we must ask what we mean to say. The urge to rush, to be first to declare artifact or not artifact, to plant a flag on a silence and call it speaking, this is a human urge, and it has won us both disasters and glories. The better urge is slower, but not timid. It says, build tools that will not panic, set protocols that respect both discovery and caution, share data as if hoarding were itself a kind of ignorance. One day an object will not merely pass, but pause, whether by accident or design, and then our behavior will be the loudest thing in the room. When the blackout came and people muttered, it was our behavior afterward, the careful reprocessing, the public release of the embarrassment, the refusal to project wishful curves that earned trust. We will need that trust again when the next seam opens and the next silence pours through it. So we stand on a shore that is less a boundary than a gradient, where the solar wind thins into the interstellar breeze, and an object from elsewhere skates along our edge with a kind of grace that could be either nature's habit or someone's intention disguised as geology. I think of the early sailors who read currents like script, who tasted the salt in their palms and knew which way the deep was pulling, who learned to make use of winds they could not own. We are those sailors now, our sextants replaced by deep space networks and our legends by peer-reviewed patience, and still the feeling is the same, that the horizon is not a limit, merely a promise that you have more to learn. In the end, 3I Atlas will keep its true story or it will not. Our task is unchanged by either outcome. We will refine our eyes until the thermal discipline of a vault and the stubbornness of ice can be told apart without guessing. We will write interceptors into existence and teach them manners. We will build our own vaults and tuck into them the things we think deserve to outlive us. Mathematics that does not care where it is written. The recipes for kindness that we keep failing but keep trying. Perhaps even the small, courageous organisms that can sleep for a century and wake hungry for light. And when the next visitor carves the sky, and there will be a next, our instruments will not simply listen, they will answer. The answer will not be a shout. It will be a movement, a craft leaning into a gravity well at the right moment, unfolding a shade the way a hand shades eyes at noon, whispering to its cryo, coolers to hush, extending a sampler that respects both surface and story. The data it returns will be less romantic than the speculations we hoarded and more revolutionary. Isotope ratios that tip origin hypotheses from maybe to probably, thermal maps that prove or disprove managed, cold, whisper-thin atmospheres of outgassing that either stutter with chemistry's habit or vitrify into engineering's intent. We will be ready to be disappointed because disappointment is the tax curiosity pays to remain honest. We will be ready to be astonished because astonishment in science is simply the feeling of reality telling you to make room. Beyond the astonishment lies the work, building on what we learned, teaching new students how to hold two possibilities without letting either leak, keeping the poetry as a lantern rather than a verdict. If the vault is real, it will open on its own time scale. If it is not, the hypothesis will have bought us better tools anyway. In both cases, we will have become a species that knows how to greet travelers at the edge of its yard with both wonder and care.